Hi, Casey Piney here to talk to you about race, class, access, gender, and equity for AEP 858, Assignment 3. I'm going to talk to you about access and equity of students in special education. I want to talk to you briefly about my past experiences. I've been a special education teacher for the past 9 years, and I have seen a huge shift from where when I first started, students were primarily pulled from the classroom in the elementary school down to the interrelated room to work on specific skills. To just this past year, my students stayed in the classroom all day, other than if they were needed to be pulled for their tier time or their MTSS time. I've seen students definitely thrive in these situations, and I would like to see more teachers try to embrace inclusion and work on those skills. My current job change, I'm going to be a special education teaching specialist next year for Wichita Public Schools, and I have 19 elementary schools in which I aid the special education teachers. And one of the part of my job description, or one of the priorities of my job, is to work on those teachers with inclusion and help them make it successful. I hope in my future that I am able to help those teachers embrace inclusion and see more students thrive in those situations. The 3 articles I chose were creating access to the general curriculum with links to grade level content for students with significant cognitive disabilities, included students with autism access to general curriculum, what is being provided, and universal design, a strategy to support students' access to the general education curriculum. The first article, creating access to the general curriculum with links to grade level contents for students with significant cognitive disabilities, briefly talked about No Child Left Behind and how for special education students we required states to establish challenging standards and to implement assessments for that measured students' performance against those standards. I think prior to this, we maybe didn't have standards that necessarily align special education and general education, and we're requiring now that all students, the special education standards, be aligned with the regular education standards. Even students with severe cognitive delays are required to take assessments and count as part of our AYP, but now it's called AMOs. And then the evolution of the students from simply taking the assessments, I think teachers maybe just did the assessments because they were told they had to for accountability, to now actually being part of the documented achievement for their building has really prompted inclusion, and teachers have seen success with it. I talked about the 4 reasons we're really seeing this change and why we did this. It was because of the reform of education and the implementation of standards in general. In 1983, a report came out to the House of Representatives called A Nation at Risk, and I think it really prompted this huge educational shift to going towards standards. It also spoke about, as educators, we have increased our expectations of students with disabilities. We're realizing they can learn and that we need to push them. It also talked about equal education opportunity, that historically reading instruction for ID students really has been underemphasized. And then to give students a sense of self-worth and determination for new opportunities. I think these students need to learn to persevere and to make decisions for themselves in life. That's just going to be something they're going to have to deal with. And so I think by challenging them, that will help them learn that. It also talked about change. Evidence of teaching life skills within the ID room is well established. So they feel like that teachers really know how to teach functional skills and the students are getting them and they understand them. But the academic research based on teaching ID students focuses mostly on sight words and the use of money, which goes back to those functional skills. So research shows this population can learn, and so we need to challenge them to that. It says, though, however, research to guide teaching academic skills linked to standards is non-existent. So we really don't have much research when we look at if their academic skills actually linked to the standards is lining up and being successful. The second article I read was about inclusion of students with autism and access to the general curriculum. In 2005, a report came out on special education, and it showed that students ages 6 to 21 identified with autism in the past 10 years had increased 500%. And if you're up to date on this, you probably know that now those have even increased even more, and they're now saying 1 in 88 students or children between the ages of 6 to 21 have autism. The reasons that these numbers have gone up is because we have improved diagnoses. We also have a broader array of conditions falling on the spectrum. I think when students may have been qualified under the OHI or other health impairment label, or maybe the LD learning disability label, they are now realizing maybe the students have autism, and we're getting better at classifying that. And then also increased rates of autism in the general population overall. It talks about the support in the classroom of students with autism, and it really varies due to the variability of their disability, because we have students who are autistic and maybe nonverbal to extremely high-functioning students who could be Asperger's and be on a college reading level. It's really hard to say what sort of support they're going to need in the general curriculum. It just depends on that student. Most students generally, though, need modifications or accommodations. Modification is an adjustment to what is being taught or expected in the classroom. So, for example, if you have a 5th grade classroom, you might give a student in your classroom a similar story about, if you're reading butterflies, you might give them a 2nd grade level story about butterflies. An accommodation would be changing the methods used for student response or involvement. So you could allow them, instead of having to write their test or report their answers by paper pencil, you could allow them to take a test orally. This was really funny. I found this really interesting. It talked about most general education teachers do not feel that they were adequately trained to work with or provide instructional accommodations for students who have disabilities. Teachers just don't feel like they have enough training in that area. General education teachers reported the need for supplemental training and support to successfully include students with autism. And the research studies that examine how general education teachers adapt instruction to accommodate students with disabilities is very sparse. I think this is really interesting because I feel like sometimes, for example, for my personal position that I'm going to have next year, I'm going to be educating more special education teachers. And I would like to be able to go talk to the regular education teachers as well. Because we have an increased number of students with autism, they're going to be seeing more and more students in their classroom with autism, and I feel like they need the same training as well. It talked about the definition of access and what teachers feel like the definition of access is. It talked about a survey that was done in 2007 in the Midwest in a small urban school. They interviewed 20 general education teachers and 15 special education teachers. The general education teachers defined access for special ed students as being able to use the same curriculum and materials as the other students. The special education teachers defined access as the use of an adapted curriculum tailored to the individual needs of the student. Again, I feel like general education teachers, obviously, and just like the slide before, need more training, and they want it. All of these interviewed believed that it was the special education teacher responsibility for providing access. So they feel like it's the special education teacher's duty and it's their responsibility for allowing these students to gain access. It goes back to, I've always said, special education is a service, not a class. Special education is a service in which we can aid the regular education teachers, and we love to do it and we love to help out, but it's a team, definitely a team process. It talked about classroom participation of students with autism in the classroom. In 2003, they did a study on students who were in an inclusive setting, and they were 40% more likely to be working on the general education curriculum than those that were in a self-contained room. It also said that students who spent a greater amount of time in the general education classroom worked 98% of the time on grade level standards. This study showed that students who were included at a higher medium rate were more likely to gain access to the general curriculum. I always tell the teachers that I work with when we do inclusion, my students aren't going to get it as fast as yours, my students aren't going to get it as much as yours, but my students are going to get it. And it might take more times, but we're here together, and it's going to be a long process, and if they get 75% of it, we need to be happy. So it's better just to have them in the regular classroom and get what they can sometimes than obviously being in the self-contained room, because they're not always getting those general curriculum or standards. It also talked about transitioning students from they gave a time where they had students in learning centers prior to when they really pushed for inclusion. They had them in learning centers, which were specialized schools for students with disabilities. I think this was more typical in the Northeast United States. So these students with a learning disability went to a special school, and all the other students there had learning disabilities. After the push for inclusion and No Child Left Behind, they got rid of those learning centers and put the students back in the regular classroom in the regular schools. Looking at those students that were transitioned back, 27% of the 6th graders and 23% of the 7th grade teachers were using differentiated curriculum to assist their classroom. So really only 25% of the teachers were differentiating their work. But the transition students that were at the Learning Center scored lower on standardized tests than the students with the similar disabilities who had been in the regular curriculum in the regular school the entire time. And then the staff there also expressed that the students who were at the Learning Center and were brought back required more support, far more support, it said, than other students with disabilities. That sense of learned helplessness that sometimes we see in special education students was evident. So findings of Article 2 is that it's clear that there are differing views as to who's responsible for providing access to the general curriculum, and that with support, general education teachers can successfully offer access to the general curriculum, but they feel like they need more training. And that these teachers feel like their training isn't adequate for them to be able to support these students. The third article I reviewed was Universal Design. It's a strategy to support students' access to the general curriculum. Universal Design learning is an environment for which design from the beginning is for maximum usability. Universal Design came from an architect named Ron Mace, and it was in the early 80s, that he was a wheelchair user, that he realized that traditional design was really failing him. And so he sought out to make architectural design that was more appealing, that was accessible for everyone from the beginning. So we coined that, and educators turned that into Universal Design Learning, UDL. And UDL offers flexible learning and curriculum environments where students can learn varying abilities. So all students have access to the general education curriculum. The principles of UDL are that mere access to the curriculum is not enough. So just setting a child in the regular education classroom, one that has disabilities, is not going to be enough. You can't just set them in front of it and they're gonna soak it up. The principles of UDL that minimize the barriers and maximize learning are multiple means of presentation to students. So allowing students to learn things through Braille, audio, video, text, photos, or movement. Also, multiple means of expression, such as writing, speaking, drawing, and video recording. And then multiple means of engagement, such as group engagement. Talked about changing our focus of learning. I really, really love this. I think it hit home for me. It says, by changing the focus of remediation of students with disabilities toward the expansion of our curricula and the usability of our classrooms, benefits will be realized by students, teachers, and schools. So understanding that we don't need to have a classroom that students are going to fit into. We need to make a classroom that our students will be successful in. So it also talked about, the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics said, equity does not mean that every student should receive identical instruction. Instead, it demands reasonable and appropriate accommodations be made as needed to promote access and attainment for all students. And I think that's great that they said all students, because you have to realize that you don't only have special education students in your classroom. You might have ESOL students, you might have gifted students, and we need to be able to challenge all of them and make all of them successful in our classroom. And then these are my references that I used for this presentation. Thank you.